Um, Next up, I'd like to introduce Lauren. And if we can just go to the next. Lauren Folkerts, she's an architect. She's super active in the community. She's president-elect of the Colorado Green Building Guild, and chair of the City of Boulder Design Advisory Board. Again, I think she gives a unique perspective, especially that she's politically active within the city and that she's running for city council. So I'm sure that she would be more than willing to have conversation with anybody about those initiatives. But just know that we all really appreciate your role and your green perspective. And Jeff said something yesterday that I thought was really interesting, is that, when buyers, speaking in my arena, when buyers are looking at houses, it's really easy to see a sub-zero refrigerator or a pretty door or nice paint colors or a nice design. And sometimes the efficiency of a house is under-recognized. And I always say, when you walk into a house that's been really well constructed, designed, with a super tight envelope, after a little bit of time in the house, you really feel it. You feel it's quiet, it's comfortable, it heats and cools more efficiently and better and quicker and even temperature. So it's funny, I think it's something that buyers, that the mindset of buyers should begin to shift, because you can always buy a new refrigerator, but you can't change the envelope of your house. And Jeff had pointed that out in a conversation yesterday. And I think that's something to be really mindful of. So anyway, let's jump to Lauren and let's take it away.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate your intro and putting this all together. So I'm just gonna kind of go back again and then go forward. So I'm talking about some of the new and evolving ideas around what sustainable building is today and what it might look like in the future. I'm going to touch on where our codes currently are and what changes we can expect to see in the future, and what to do in a world whose rules are always changing. One of the things we love about Boulder, right? So, like Jeff mentioned, we're in a race against time. By 2050, we need to reduce carbon emissions by 80 to 90% globally to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. For thousands of years, we've been building buildings with keen regard for nature and tuned into the natural phenomena, weather, all of that, local conditions. But in the 20th century, with the rapid shifts in scientific advancements, we've decided to let technology free us from these conventional restraints. And any unintended consequences that have come up, we've answered with more engineering and more power. And this has led us to where we are today. Our buildings right now are using too much energy. They have too many toxins, and they're out of step with nature and our current environmental predicament. To build for the future, we need to look both forward and backward. We need to combine new technology and traditional building techniques, because buildings are a big part of both the problem and the solution. Their construction and operation is one of our leading sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. As Jeff mentioned, in Boulder, we have some of the strictest energy codes in the country. We will continue to see our HERS and ERI targets continue to lower, and the city is certainly going to continue to push for the electrification of more buildings. Boulder is also working on updates to our climate action plan. And these updates are going to be big. They're fundamental changes regarding the impacts that we're measuring and the goals that we're trying to
Michael,
as a community.
Hey, looks like you tried to call me a little while ago.
Oh yeah, I was just
The updated climate action plan will measure not only the greenhouse gases produced from goods and transportation within city limits, but also the emissions produced outside of city limits for goods and services that we utilize. This is likely to more than double our current reported emissions. Given Boulder's contributions to climate change with our high emissions rate per capita and our capacity to engage in climate action because of our high GDP and our highly engaged community, the city has set ambitious targets that encompass all major greenhouse gas emissions to become net zero within a time frame that will increase the global chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. To do this, we're talking about some pretty ambitious targets: 100% renewable energy by 2030, a 40% reduction in embodied energy by 2031, achieving zero operational emissions from new and existing buildings by 2040, and ensuring 25% of high emissions building materials can be reused, requiring new construction to be offset, to offset the embodied emissions, and requiring a building materials inventory for all new construction by 2023. These are aggressive targets, and at this point, it's unclear how the city can even legally regulate all of the areas. But one thing is for certain, and that's that we should expect to continue to see increasing challenging sustainability targets and to push for significant changes in the building industry. So we all want to do the right thing, but with these goals and rules constantly changing, how do we stay ahead of the curve? How do we anticipate the future trends and requirements? I'm going to lay out these 5 principles that I think are pretty fundamental. There's no real magic in it, but it's about returning to these historic principles and ideas. And the more we realize these, the simpler the solutions become. A well-designed building incorporates these smart decisions instead of relying on technology. There's always going to be a certain need for mechanical systems and sort of the cutting edge, but that should play a secondary role. We don't need to reinvent the way we build, but we do need to focus on the fundamental principles and reintegrate new old habits. So the first one I'm going to talk about is lowering the embodied carbon. Operational energy is so important, and it's great that Boulder's energy code has focused on reducing it. But in the time scale of 2050, which is essential for our civilization to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we need to understand that most of the carbon emitted, 80% of it, is in the making of the buildings, not in their operations. One major issue is that many of the strategies for reducing operational energy require an increase in embodied energy. Like compounding interest, embodied carbon avoided at the start of a building's life will have a greater beneficial impact on the emissions saved over the lifetime of the building. Because the embodied carbon in the structure of a building can account for as much as half of the building's total carbon emissions, reusing and renovating structures when possible is one of the best things we can do. We also need to minimize waste, source new materials that are produced with less energy intensive processes and have a higher recycled content. And finally, we need to incorporate more plant content because plants remove CO2 from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and store it in the plant. Because they do this, when we use plant material in our buildings, we turn our buildings into carbon storage. This is one of the easiest and most straightforward types of carbon capture techniques that we have. This is, again, another area that our codes don't touch on yet, but as I mentioned, with our updated climate action plan, they will. By building with plant-based materials, we can turn our cities into huge carbon banks. Using wood and other plant-based materials, we can break the carbon cycle because unlike forests, where trees grow and then die and decompose, buildings lock in carbon for the long term, as long as we don't tear them down. Another area that the code doesn't yet address, but will, and is receiving more attention on the consumer side because of the growing number of people experiencing multiple chemical sensitivities, is the toxicity of construction materials. Not only is this important for residents, but it's also really important for workers on the job site, workers in factories, and for our planet itself. There are a lot of tools to help us make more informed decisions about what is safe to be incorporated into a building and what isn't. The Greenpeace plastics pyramid is a newer one. We also have the Living Building Red List, Declare labels, Precautionary List, Healthy Building Networks, and the Pharos Project. Eliminating toxic materials is important, and beyond that, we should look again to more natural products and ones that require less processing and ideally can be found locally. Returning to the traditional building technologies and materials of our area. Straw bale is a great example of this. Straw is a relatively renewable material that sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere. And other examples include wood fiber, hemp, wool, cellulose insulation, timber structural material, and lime, plaster, and adobe finishes. Beyond being a better choice for the environment, these natural materials can also be a healthier choice for indoor air quality. They can absorb pollutants and help buffer humidity levels when properly selected. They also have no VOCs. Jeff talked about this a lot. When we build a new home or have a significant remodel or addition project, it's important to make sure that we are investing in the building envelope. This is the piece that is the hardest to upgrade in the future, and using quality materials is not only better for the environment, but it can make a big impact on the quality and performance of the building over time. While plastic installations have been designed to meet the criteria of our energy codes that they measure for performance, they often have hidden pitfalls. These pitfalls vary by type of material and manufacturer, but these issues range from low performance and extreme temperatures, reduced performance over time, and a high flammability. This graph here shows the increased insulation performance of a wood fiber board compared to XPS of a similar R value, due specifically to its thermal buffering capacity. So there you see the diurnal shifts and how the wood fiber board is keeping the highest temperature lower during the day. This is an area where hiring architects and contractors who have extensive expertise with sustainable practices is crucial. Even in a dry environment, managing humidity and executing tricky details is incredibly important to the performance of these homes over time. Now I can get to that. We need to build for a 100-year time frame. We want to, if we're looking to interrupt the carbon cycle by trapping carbon in our buildings, this is only possible when buildings are preserved and maintained, which means on top of all of this, it's crucial that we focus on good design, beauty, and delight to make sure that our buildings are loved and preserved for generations. So I know that was a lot really quickly. Thank you guys so much for following along. And if you'd like to see some of these ideas in practice, please consider joining us for the Boulder Green Home Tour. It's an event I've enjoyed helping organize for the past 3 years, and it's always fun to get to talk to architects and homeowners about what these buildings have meant for them and the quality of their lives. All of these issues are really important to me, both personally and professionally. Climate change and our affordable housing crisis are two of the main issues that have motivated me to run for city council. And if those resonate with you, I'd encourage you to go to my website, find out more, and please reach out to me if you have any questions.